Welcome to the Excellence at Work podcast, where we explore the strategies and best practices that drive business success. I'm Rachel Cook, COO of Brandon Hall Group and the host of our podcast, along with members of our executive team. In each episode, we'll dive into the latest trends, insights, and real-world examples from some of the most exciting leaders from organizations worldwide. Be part of our journey and learn from the best as we discuss innovative approaches and cutting-edge technologies for talent management, learning and development, leadership, diversity and inclusion, and more.
Hi, everyone. This is Michael Rochelle, Chief Strategy Officer here at the Brandon Hall Group. And I'm joined by three great individuals that I think are going to be hitting a topic that we all need to be paying much more attention to. And we'll get into that in a second. But before we do, I want to give each person an opportunity to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about them, and then we'll talk about the topic and what we're going to be hitting. So I'll start out with Ryan. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Michael. Ryan Austin, founder, CEO at a company called Cognota, and we eat, live, and breathe the world of learning operations over here.
Josh?
I'm Josh Cavalier, founder and CEO of joshcavalier.ai. It's my first year in learning and development. Got started back in the 90s with CD-ROM and ran a company called Lodestone for 20 years. Was one of the top Adobe authorized training providers in the US, and I consider myself an education technologist.
Thanks, Josh. And Matt?
Hey, good afternoon, team. Matt Mason. I have the privilege of leading the Talent Operations Office with Truist Financial. I've been in the learning and talent space for about 30 years. Have the privilege of dabbling in all sorts of different parts of talent and learning. When I'm not doing that, I'm a big proponent of servant leadership, write almost daily on LinkedIn, and looking forward to this conversation. Thanks, Michael.
Well, thank you all. So really a cool lineup, and I think it's a super cool topic. So let's get into it. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about learning operations. And for many people that may be listening to this, we were talking about this in the green room, so to speak. And some people might go, "Oh, that's an UG conversation." But as we were saying, no one can avoid the UG conversations. This is like a top priority within learning organizations. And we're going to get into cool terms like friction and cost recapture and reallocation and AI and transformation. But what I want to say to everyone is this has got to be a super important topic for all organizations. We've got to figure out how to make this a better process within our organizations, both from sustainability, consistency, reproducibility, get the analytics and insights going. Can't just have this be a spreadsheet and a time suck. So that's kind of where we're going to go. And I think the group that you have here are going to give you some tremendous insights into how they're transforming their own organizations and others, and how I think it's attainable. I've spent a lot of time with Ryan and his team, and what seems to be the brass ring isn't that difficult to reach. His company has done a great job. We've done a great piece of joint research together. We'll make sure anyone who's interested in getting that asset, we can get them out to him. Just drop a note at michael.rochelle@brandonhall.com. We'll make sure we get it out to you. But the key to all of this, Ryan, I'm going to start with you, is let's define it. I know people need to have this defined because I think a lot of people have it out of bounds, inbounds, sort of right, not right. But what's the heart of it? What are we really talking about when we use that term, learning ops?
Yeah, learning operations or learn ops, as we often call it, it's kind of the boring but important stuff because it's the foundation of how we all work and how we spend time and money as a talent or learning development function, which is really important, more important today than ever before because of the pressures that we're getting from the CFO office and from our CHROs, et cetera, because of the pressures that they're getting from the business. So what's really happening is that just business operations in general are being reinvented right now. And I think you have probably the more accurate set of data than I do, but from what I read, Michael, 30 to 40% of HR budget is kind of going away and not coming back. And so it's this concept of how are we going to do more with less? And the only way to do that is to work more efficiently and more effectively. And if you're using disparate tools or processes, still manual processes often that we see, you're just not going to be working efficiently and effectively. And then almost even worse is if you're thinking about processes as a disparate process, that automatically means that your team is going to start working in silos and in these verticals. And these verticals should actually be unified to work together from a systematic approach in order to get the automation and efficiency gains. So again, it's the boring but important topic, because for the teams that fail to do this starting now, and really you should have started many years ago, kind of like Matt and what his team has done, and what Josh is doing a lot of research on right now as well, you're going to be left in the dust. And we want to help the industry move forward quickly and get to a standardized way of thinking about this.
Yeah, it makes me think, Josh, I want to throw it over to you, kind of riffing on what Ryan's getting at, is where do you see the opportunities? Because I think too many times we kind of position things as a challenge model for organizations. You know, it's like a barrier that we have to overcome. But I'm sure in your research and insights, like I think this is a real opportunity to just improve, be more effective, be more efficient. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it seems like that the companies that I work with, that they got to be teed up and ready to go to actually show that value. And so there's some give and take that needs to happen with the business in regards to how that shows up, access to data, actionable data, and being able to have the tools and the platforms in place to show that return on investment. And I think that's the challenge because, sometimes the L&D function, they don't have access to that. And so there's this give and take that has to happen in regards to the way that that shows up. But I can tell you that with organizations that I've worked with that have everything teed up in regards to access to multiple models that are secure, they're working on automations and driving towards agents, and they're able to actually go ahead and show that return on investment. There is some velocity there. But again, the L&D function and the way that it's been operating for at least the last 20 years has been somewhat stagnant. And I think now we have an opportunity to go ahead and redefine how we show up and work closer with the business and work at the speed of business. And that's where learning operations comes into play.
I love that. And Matt, you're on the ground, so you're living this every day. It would be interesting to share with the audience, like, when did you decide enough is enough and that you had to do something different? What were the triggers to make it happen?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. No,
Sorry, Matt.
No.
I didn't know he was going to throw it to you. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, so for me, the journey started years ago when I was at a large hardware company here in North Carolina. And I went to our chief learning officer at the time and said, this isn't working. We've got all of this stuff spread out across our organization. We probably had 85 folks on the floor, designers and leaders. And I pitched the idea of centralizing, and I had a list: budget, process, some of the basic top 10 basics that we would want in a learning operations function. And just did some quick back of the napkin math and said, yeah, I think we could do it with probably 3 people. And the next reorganization, I got my wish. Then I was leading the learning operations team, and I picked up technology, and I picked up measurements and reporting. And before I knew it, I had a pretty cool team doing some pretty cool stuff. And then went to a telecom organization, did something similar, now at Truist, doing it in talent, which also includes learning at a massive scale, because we're dealing with legal and cyber and anything that we can take off the plates of our talent or learning professionals to reduce the friction. We're doing it. And we're putting out a weekly bulletin of sorts of this is what we're doing, and really showing quantitative and qualitative metrics week to week of the movement and the measurement that we're taking. And that's been the journey, and we've got some ways to go with creating more efficiencies with the groups, but it's been fun, and we've hired some great people that really enjoy that kind of work.
So just to make sure I understand, so the trigger was someone said enough is enough. We got to get this to work right. We got to get rid of the friction, the aerodynamic drag. We got to pull it back into place. A question for you, Ryan, and when you're reaching out, and this is to the audience in general, is, I mean, is learning ops really like something you see when you walk into a learning organization? Like, is there a door that says learning ops and you open the door and there's people there and like stuff's happening? Or is it for people in the audience that don't have that coalesced to like a department or a function? Is this part of the problem? Like it's spread out, it's kind of ad hoc, people are jumping in and out, and it's kind of loosely done. Like, what do you see, Brian, when you first start working with organizations?
It really depends on the size of the organization, but we are seeing acceleration in actual job titles, physical titles, learning operations. I think when we first started to help talk about this category, there was only a few thousand people with that title, and we're starting to see like more than 10,000 plus titles, and it's growing quickly month over month. It's actually something that we track. It's kind of cool. But uh, so it is becoming more important again as companies really need to show efficiency, effectiveness, and impact, and there's real business pressures about it. This is significantly important. When we talk to some companies, larger enterprises, they might have a headcount OPEX of $10 million a year for learning and talent development. Some have more. Even if you have an OPEX of $1.5 million, if you're not working efficiently and effectively, you're losing the company money instead of making the company money and creating value. And it's not just the efficiency, it's the impact as well. There's too many teams that we meet that are not prioritizing investments. I call it investments versus initiatives. Too many times we hear about, a talent program initiative or a learning initiative. It's an investment. You're spending the company's time and money. That's an investment. And you have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure it's a good investment. And so if you're working on something that is against your CEO, which no other business function really would think or act like that. But if your CEO is standing up on stage or writing a report, if you're a public company and saying these are our top 5 corporate initiatives this year, and you're doing something that is different than that, then you're probably going to have very low impact. And it's just a mindset shift, similar to what we saw with DevOps back in the day as well. These departments were looked at order taking, low value cost centers, and but it's time finally for learning and talent. We've heard about this for decades about this shift and whatnot, but there's too many people behind it this time where I think it's a lasting shift, which I'm excited about, and hopefully that's the truth, that it's here to stay.
Let's do a proof point, Josh. Do you think it's here to stay? Do you think people have made the turn and they're elevating this from an importance standpoint and want to get on it?
Yeah, I mean, when I talk to leaders, they definitely know they got to elevate themselves within the business, and they're looking for ways to do that. They're looking for language to use to talk, and I believe it's a great reframe that needs to happen. And I know that for myself personally, I like to go out and call instructional designers. They're now human machine performance analysts in this new age of AI, and the way that they need to show up. And we now need to go ahead and measure not just human performance, but the collaboration between humans and machines simultaneously, and what's the net gain or what's the net performance from that collaboration. And the analyst part is being able to get access to data to make decisions, and to also go ahead and elevate the function so that we're working closely with the business and working closely with talent, because of the way that skills can degrade, or the way that skills and roles are going to be dynamic and shift. And then how, as a function, do we operate and navigate that and partner with HR so that we're working in concert together? And so there's a lot of movement that needs to happen. But again, I think at the end of the day, it's a maturation that needs to occur, and working closer to the business and understand exactly how we need to show up and how we map back to those business results.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on it, Joe. You said something interesting, is some organizations feel like they have this kind of chicken and egg issue. I'm sure Matt's going to start nodding his head, is for us to prove that we need to do this, we need the data to show that it needs to get fixed. And you kind of go in this circular problem of like, how do I identify? In your experience in working with organizations, how do they decide when it's right? Like what data, what information are they using to say this is out of control or this isn't working right? Or what from what you see, what brings that to that level of elevation?
It's definitely across the board. I mean, it shows up completely different. I can say that for teams that I've worked with that have been successful in elevation is they've been able to go ahead and talk to leaders, describe the way that they can go about solving these problems. They get access to the tools and platforms that they need. And specific around AI, it just shows up better. They're able to actually have velocity to be able to go ahead and support customers or support associates internally. And then once they have access and then they understand exactly how to implement properly, then they can show the value.
I love that. So Matt, everyone's probably dying to know because you're a practitioner on the ground. What is it that you can do now, or what is it that you can do now better once you started focusing on this? Like, are there a couple concrete use cases where you say this got better because we decided to focus on it, and this we're able to do now. We couldn't do it before because of this. Anything you can share there?
Yeah, the big shift that I've had to make with teams that I've led in the space is nobody cares about butts and seats. Nobody cares about your instructional design format or template or your charter. They care about dollars and cents and FTE, time saves, increase, decrease of performance. That's all they care about. And so as I've coached folks to start talking in that manner, things change. And so there's things going on right now at work that I'll talk very sort of high level about, but we've been called to the table to provide some business cases on how talent can do some things for the business better than we're doing it now. But guess what we're bringing? Dollars and cents and Excel spreadsheets, and we're going to show how we're going to shift from one model to another model and the cost savings and performance increase out of it at the same time. Previous organization I worked at, we made a pitch to the business. It was a sales organization. We said we would like to switch our onboarding program for sellers, and we want to switch it from a 13-week program to a 10-week program. We want to go flip classroom, but the hook was, and we guarantee that at the end of the first year, we're going to save 10%, or we're going to provide 10% more sales based on this program. So basically, year one, we're going to pay for this thing. And the business said, okay, fine, they bit. And we ended up at the end of the first year, 18% better on sales. Of course, what did they ask next? They asked for a sales manager program. And that's what the team delivered then the following year. So by shifting the conversation away from learning terms and more business terms, we've been very, very successful in that space.
All right, Josh. So it wouldn't be a 2025 mid-year podcast unless we bring up AI, right? So how does this all tie in? How does AI tie in to this whole idea of learn ops?
Right. So the way that I see, at least when it comes to organizations where things headed, that it's very much a top-down show, which eventually bump into learning operations. What I mean by that is having data accessible throughout the whole entire organization, both structured and unstructured, so that decisions can be made and also automations and agents can be set up properly. But what it comes down to is activation, and there's a maturation process that naturally occurs with that, to the point where if you have access to the correct data, you can make decisions and create learning experiences on the fly that are hyper personalized, activate them, and then measure them in real time. That is the goal. And if we can get to that point to where the business can actually see these efforts being made, the investment in the platforms, the investment in the people that can orchestrate these learning experiences, especially for frontline sales, then we have now created a lockstep with the business, and that's what we're driving towards, is this redefinition of the function. Again, Learn Ops is the drive. Learn Ops is the blueprint for all this.
So, Ryan, picking up on what Josh is saying, very impactful, what he's getting at. Like, how do you introduce the concept of AI to organizations and connected to LearnOps?
It really is a maturity exercise, Michael. And the reality, I mean, we just did great research together on this, and the benchmarked results on the combined kind of research we did was that the industry as a whole is still not very mature. So there's a lot of work to do before we can get to actual autonomous AI, which is in the horizon. And actually, even by just unifying workflows, you're already there, but then it's a big change exercise, and how do you focus on it, and things like that. So I would define AI as probably the highest level of maturity, even above predictive kind of maturity that we talk about in the research we did. And we highlighted kind of a phase step process on how you get to there, from starting with chat all the way to autonomous AI, even past agents or past operators, which is really exciting. So I think the future is bright, and we're not that far away from getting there. But for most teams, before you can get to even technology, streamlining processes with technology, it's just about how you're thinking about things. I was at a big conference just last week. They had, a big kind of networking party with thousands of people, etc. And I met a director of learning and development who was introduced to me, and I said, "What are some of your priorities right now?" And of course, some of the typical things came up, and they said, "And how does that tie to your corporate business goals?" And there was a lot of stumbling and a lot of talk around retention. We need to retain people. We need to do leadership because of this. All important, but it wasn't a very clear answer. Like, these are the 3 or 5 things that are driving the business forward. We invested into programs to support the business growth in these ways. It was stumbling of words, which means that we don't know how to run our business function aligned with business goals. In most cases, not all cases. That's why I like having Matt here alongside talking about these topics, because they do a great job at Truist.
Yeah. So speaking of that, Matt, like where would you put your organization in terms of the maturity curve for AI?
What's interesting about most banks is they are, if you sort of think about sort of the scale of crossing the street, right? Everybody's on one corner and they're going to cross the street. Everyone's kind of on that journey. Banks are still standing on the curb trying to figure out how to get off and into the crosswalk. And there's some really good reasons why. We have regulatory reasons why we have to be really careful. I mean, the volume of cyber crimes right now at banks, even in the talent space, is mind-boggling. And so there's some really good reasons. Truist is doing a fantastic job of getting there. We do have some AI in-house. We're also, as a learning talent organization, we're on the list with the AI governance group with a project on there to bring things. That's the power of our learning operations team. Learning ops was the one that worked with our internal learning folks to put that on the list. And so we're getting there. But what's conversely different is there isn't a single person I know that doesn't have Chat GPT on their phone, that isn't talking into their cell phone and then emailing it to themselves to get work done more efficiently and effectively. So we're going to get there. I think there are other industries that I'm extremely jealous of that have made this shift and are doing it well. I also think there's going to be a big change to Josh's point earlier around instructional design. It's about to change. And I think it's going to change in a really big way. And I know folks are saying it's a couple of years. I think it's sooner rather than later. And I think LearnOps is a great opportunity to centralize our friction type activities to allow learning and talent professionals to do their jobs so we can continue to make traction, provide good, solid ROI back to the business so we can continue to grow our organizations.
Interesting. So Ryan, kind of getting into the home stretch here, I'm going to give you a scenario. I'd love for you to walk the audience through it. So I'm the head of learning, and I've got 2 minutes with the chief learning officer to talk about connecting, improving the effectiveness and efficiency of learning ops, which will have this impact on learning, which will have this impact on individual team and organizational performance. And I've got like a minute or two to do that before I completely lose their attention span. How do you make that happen? Because that's a real world conversation that needs to take place, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it comes down to terminology, business terminology that everybody understands. And in today's world of less resources, more work, it's about operational excellence. And I would say there's under 10% of learning and talent functions in the world that are running at peak performance when it comes to operational excellence. And again, the reality is that the budgets are going to be squeezed, and you need mission critical now to operate with excellence in order to keep up. Otherwise, things could get bad, and that's not good for the CLO. That's not good for the CHRO, and actually the CFO as well. In big learning functions and talent functions, they want to unify some data, even if you're federated or decentralized. There's no reason why you can't have centralized data in some areas back to the CFO office or procurement office to do good things for business, like optimizing tail spend of vendors and seeing where there's crossover and things like that. Learning operations allows you to do that because you could roll up categories of budgets. You don't even need to roll up all of your budget, but categories of budgets like vendors to see where you can optimize, save the company money, and create more value. And I think that's something that everybody cares about. Your CEO cares about that.
What would you add to that from your perspective?
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot of headwinds. There's this really odd dichotomy in the marketplace in regards to the way that we see the technology and AI and the maturation of organizations, where they're at. It's odd, honestly, because because it feels like everything's moving extremely fast, but when you have those honest conversations about where systems and where technology is at, there's this massive drag for most organizations. And I have a feeling that we're going to be in this like slow, drawn out process for a while until it gets to a crescendo. And then all of a sudden, I feel that organizations across the board are going to move extremely fast to get things together. As competition or as other entities out there see opportunities to move fast into some verticals using current AI technology to potentially go up against folks. So it should be interesting to see how that shakes out the next couple of years.
And Matt, did you have to have any version of that kind of conversation with your team to kind of like sell up to what the opportunity is?
Yeah, there's four things I tell them on a regular basis. One, you need to know what the business enterprise strategy is and the objectives behind that. If you don't understand it, we need to get you all the decks. Secondly, we need to be picking projects that align with that, and then there's the art of saying no to everything else. Thirdly, we got to be really, really good on storytelling. We got to be really good about regular feedback, not only to our bosses but also to the business, and then just continued repetition in that space.
I like that. Final thought, just for all of you. If you were to leave our audience with one single biggest benefit for automating learning ops, what would be that one benefit? What would be the one thing you'd throw down on the table? So I'll start with you, Ryan.
Just keeping up with what businesses are really looking to do. I don't think they want you to prove ROI or impact. They just expect you know how to talk about ROI and impact. If you're a business leader, it doesn't matter if you're in talent, learning, IT, supply chain, the list goes on. If you're spending company money, you should be able to answer, where is it going? What is it doing? Are we winning or losing? And if we're losing, what do we do in order to start winning? And it sounds so easy, but there's just been no unified way to operate to get access to the data. It's not that learning and talent people aren't good business professionals. We're great business professionals. I would argue the best, because we have to serve the business and the workforce. Just look at COVID, when overnight everybody worked at home. Who were the superheroes? Talent and learning and development. We taught people how to work remotely, and we saved a lot of businesses from bad things happening. So how do we apply that concept to everything else we're doing? And that is the benefit of learning operations. It integrates the priorities with the business impact and allows you to unify the data and the workflows so that you can do this easily. And that's the main benefit that we see.
Josh, what do you think the big benefit is from your perspective?
Goes back to the people. What Ryan's talking about is an evolution to a healthy company. And when you have a healthy company, you retain your talent and there's less attrition. And right now, that's a very valuable resource, is maintaining talent. And not only that, but maturing the talent in the age of AI to where they're working with machines and coordinating and maturing workflows and maturing automations. And so there's this natural flywheel. And so the health of the business is paramount. And when you have ops aligned and you can actually get that going, I think it's going to go ahead and feed right back into the people.
Love that. Matt, what do you think the single biggest benefit has been for your organization?
We have really focused on thinking about business problems differently to be able to solve them faster and more efficiently. Even in banking, the business is moving faster than it's ever moved before. And if we're not willing to find a way to keep up, then we're going to be obsolete. And so we've done really well in that space. I think the second thing is hire great people and really give them great leaders and opportunities to shine. And I think third, we got to continue talking as an organization and as a community. I think we've got to make space in our days and our weeks to share best practices and help each other out, because we can all benefit from each other's experiences.
What's interesting to kind of wrap this all up, and I'm sure the audience is excited about this too, is when I first started out the conversation, I've even expanded my thinking as to what learning ops is. Like, it's so strategic. It's not about making sure you're using your trainers properly or something crazy like that. It really is part of the overall business transformation. And I think for many people, they're probably thinking, hey, this gets me the seat at the table that I want to. Like, I have strategic impact. I can prove that I have strategic impact. I bring a powerful ROI to the table. I can be there. I can be part of these conversations and show the value of learning. So I learned a tremendous amount from three very interesting perspectives. So I want to thank you, Ryan, Josh, Matt, for joining me today. This is Michael Rochelle again from the Brandon Hall Group. If you have any questions for any of the speakers, reach out to us directly at success@brandonhall.com, and look forward to the next time. And we'll have to follow up, Ryan, in a few months so we can talk about more the wins that you're seeing with your organization.
Love it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Josh. And thank you, Brandon Hall.